will have a speaker from India, Mr. Vijay Kumar. He works in Singapore now, but he has been fairly instrumental in one of the topics which we don't normally discuss, but we know about it, how our artifacts have been stolen over the centuries and how they have gone to various parts of the world and his efforts to bring them back. Mr. Vijay Kumar he's an art enthusiast, blogger, and the word I can, which is rightly used, a vigilante who works to bring priceless stolen cultural artifacts back to India. So Vijay Kumar ji, I can please go ahead and start your seminar. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all friends of India. Today, it's going to be slightly a long deck because I thought I'd introduce this oft neglected subject, but we feel it's very, very passionate to us and to India. And if you want to know more about our work, we call it the India Pride Project because we feel we're restoring India's pride one murti at a time. On social media, you can look us by our handle called Bring Our Gods Home. Uh, so basically, today we're going to see a little bit of background of cultural property theft. And before we start the actual session, I'd like to dedicate my work, our work, to the unknown artists and sculptors who created these divine works. First salute to these great artists, and then to the kings and chieftains who supported them with their patronage, generous patronage, and to the people like you and me who continue to enjoy them. What we're going to see are priceless works of art. That they are seen as art now is incidental. And to demonstrate this, I would like to share our most recent success. These were priceless murtis of, as you can see, Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita, along with the Hanuman that were stolen in 1978 from a temple in Tamil Nadu. We tracked them to a dealer in London, and on August 15 last year, uh, the murti was restituted in London. And as you can see, actually, art coming back to being the murtis that they were originally destined to be. So we'll see later during the session. This was the actual ceremony. We got priests in London to come and deck them up to be the gods they were. And these murtis are now safely back home. They've gone back to the actual shrine from where they were stolen in the temple, and daily pujas are currently going on. I'd also like to introduce uh, an important aspect of our icons. All of us know in the early 14th century, especially in Central and South India, there were a lot of invasions, cultural iconoclasts, and our ancestors basically did a lot of work and effort in trying to safeguard these movies. What you're seeing is what is today called a buried hoard. These movies were because the villagers would make them for metal. So the custodians would basically bury the bronzes for safety. And what you're seeing is one such bronze, of course, the Shiva Nataraja, that was uh, recovered last year. And you can actually see him coming out of the earth after 600 years, buried there. Of course, it's Chola bronze that's over 1,000 years old. But you actually see the beauty of this is the sacrifice of the custodians bore fruit, just a light wash, and the people are already worshipping him. And this is one important aspect that is often neglected by people is that these murtis were never destined to be objects of art. They were destined to be living gods. And in Tamil Nadu, the state I am from, we call them Tirumeni, which literally means body of God. And this is how a murti, which is in under continuous worship, this one is in the Tanjore Big Temple, So you can actually see a slight difference when a murti is under constant worship compared to a buried bronze. The buried bronze basically oxidizes. It gets a slightly greenish patina, just like rust, but it's good for the bronze. Um, just keep that in the back of your mind. When we go more, you will know why I brought it up. Uh, a lot of our murtis are under neglect. These are currently in a temple in this state. So I would say that we are also at fault in neglecting our heritage back home. So that's another topic. So we go and look at the art market, which is the most least studied. We call it the gray market, and a lot of people are not aware of the scale, scope, and size of this loot. So I thought I'd introduce you to the amazing dark world of art or sacred art. The stone murti that you're seeing, of course, is a bodhisattva from the Pala school, which is bordering West Bengal, Orissa, Bangladesh, in current day Bangladesh. But it left our shores 100 years ago. So it's supposed to have a perfect provenance because it was pre-independence, and because it had proper paperwork and it was legally taken out of the country, this is the kind of money that we're talking about. And you can actually see uh, the value of our murtis. Of course, for us, they are priceless, but in the international art market, these are the kind of transactions we're talking of. And you have to keep in mind that these are not policed, do not have any sort of international censorship or monitoring. So this is the kind of values and volumes that are being thrown out. What you're seeing, sorry, and you're now looking at the art market share. The traditional markets, of course, are in terms of the global market, you're looking at the US and the UK. Of course, China is a very specific market. They look for purely Chinese artifacts. So the erstwhile colonial market, the European Union and current day UK account for almost 25% of the global art market, the US being a majority 40%. So between the two, we're talking about a 65% market share for the art market. And when you go into the art and antiquities market, it's almost a similar kind of percentage. Almost 60% is what we are looking at in terms of the spread. So how does art get trafficked? And normally they go into intermediary spaces. Uh, they are taken out of porous borders into intermediary holding points in Hong Kong, Zurich, and other ports. They're taken to London if they require restoration work, mostly into Switzerland because the Swiss laws enable, we'll see a little more of the Swiss laws in a while, and then of course into the major markets in London and New York. The US cultural property market is big, and I'm just throwing all these data. You can see the references below. So at a later date, if you are interested to know more about them, please refer to them. You can actually see sometime around 2007, there is a definite drop in what is today considered to be the open market for antiquities. So that is a strong black market or a dark market for antiquities, which is working on private placements. What you're seeing here is predominantly what is studied, meaning published data. So something happened in 2007 that led to a drop, visible drop of various markets. But what you're seeing in green is the Indian antiquities market. So we will see what it is in a while. Of course, I'm just showing you some more studies in terms of whether there is looting. Archaeologists were interviewed, and you can actually see that all of them agreed that looting exists. Every exists in almost most source nations, and it's a very dichotomous terminology that is used. Like we are some mine that can be poured. Uh, the Egypt, Italy, Cambodia, for example, Afghanistan are looked at source nations by the markets, and about 80% of them personally encountered the looting. And yes, so this is a big and present problem, and it's not something that you see in the 1960s and 70s. This is a real and present danger that's happening. So who's responsible? So quite often whenever we talk about this, people talk about porous borders because, but again, some of the examples that you're going to see in the later part of the presentation, you'll be looking at objects declared as garden furniture arriving directly into the US. So if our customs in India were not diligent enough, I would say the same applies to the US side as well. So this requires a lot of cooperation, coordination, education, and capacity building customs worldwide. So in around 2007 to 2011, this is where till the time the mature markets wouldn't care. They didn't realize the seriousness of antiquities trafficking or the illicit antiquities network. And that was when they realized that it had links to transnational organized crime, international terrorism, and money laundering. So even about a year ago, FinCEN reported companies dealing in money laundering using artifacts as fences. So apart from this, it also obviously the guys who are making money out of these are not great savants. So it is linked to terrorism activity as well. And this is what changed the tide. In the US, for example, this is what was presented to the US Parliament committee that you can see in terms of how much is the cost of a trafficked antiquity and how much it can basically earn and how much that money can be used to buy arms and ammunition in the open market. And this is where some of the examples that you're seeing here are from that presentation from the Antiquities Coalition in the US. You can actually see what's happened here is high resolution satellite imagery of a Daesh site, wherein in 2011, you can actually see the comparison in 2014, and all the small dots that you're seeing are illicit digs, and each of these digs are basically digging for artifacts for which they gave licenses to the subsistence looters. So that means not only that antiquities trafficking, physical objects, finance terrorism, even the licenses was an important income source for them. So what happens to all these antiquities that come out of the ground? So the art market is very smart. They employ what is today known to be as fencing. So objects are fenced. Of course, these auction houses and collectors have deep pockets. They have tons of money. So one such example is this British dealer called Robin Shimes. Robin Shimes was arrested in 2014, and a few years later, the Italian police Cardinal Yard Squad raided a Swiss free port, and they found $20 million worth of antiquities in a room or a locker in the Freeport that was not opened for 30 years. So 30 years, Robin Shimes had fenced these artifacts. So what fencing does, it hopes to fade, a public memory to fade so that they can bring out the artifacts to sell. Such free ports are coming all over the world. There are 55 such around the world, and most of them are literally free. So nobody knows what is inside, what is going on, what is not. Then we're talking about private sales. What you looked at so far is only auctions and art fairs, which is the documented one. As I told you, the private sales is growing. It's almost coming to about 40% of now. Great. So what is happening in these private auctions? This is an auction or a sale night in a dealer in New York. Uh, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, you can actually see our Murtis who we worship as living gods back home, uh, being reduced, being showcased curios. People are posing in front of it. Not in that, here you see a very famous collector uh, using our sacred Koshta Murtis to align his swimming pool. And it seems to be a fashion, to keeping our gods on. Uh, So this is not a new thing, a colonial fetish. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of this. The bronzes that you see basically were part of a buried hoard. Surprisingly, India had a Danish colony in Tarangambadi. The Danish collector was digging his fort to extend his fort wall when he chanced on a buried hoard. So obviously, our ancestors buried them for safety, but then he chanced on this The locals begged him, cried for him to give back the gods to him. But then he basically took it back with him and sold it to the Prince of Denmark. And they are now currently housed in the Royal Danish Museum. Now, what irks me is this is Pete Anker, the Danish collector, who basically took away these bronzes. He told them that the bronzes have lost power. They cannot be restored because there's no temple nearby, which is blatantly false. The Masamai the
Uh,
temple is just,
so,
yeah, sorry.
sorry, Vijay ji, sorry to interrupt. We are getting feedback from the audience that your voice is not audible. So
Okay.
either if you could move a bit forward
Okay,
to
sure.
like, yeah,
Is it better now?
it's louder, yeah. So, and we will
Okay,
continue to monitor it and we'll let you know.
sure.
Thank you.
Sorry
Thanks.
about that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So, um, so what happened was he basically told the prince that he bought it from the locals. So, what happened in terms of what happened in terms of just a minute, please. Let me try this. Sorry. So, in terms of the narrative, he told that he bought the bronzes from the locals. And what we realized from reading the actual works is he gave them a bag of rice and some betel nuts. And that was his payment to the locals for a set of 30 buried murtis. Similarly, there are stories of the Denmark collection. There was another Jesuit priest who took away some more sculptures from Karnataka for giving the locals a pair of spectacles. So there are a lot of such inconsistencies. Another weird one is this beautiful Vishnu from Coimbatore with consorts. Uh, they were found as part of a buried hoard in the heart of Coimbatore. The temple, the Karivarda Paramal temple, which still exists today without the bronzes, bid for the bronzes. The priest went up to 1,000 rupees. This was in 1898. But he was outbid. And who was he outbid by? He was outbid by Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India. And Lord Curzon bequeathed these bronzes to the Victoria and Albert Museum, where they currently host. So we have a lot of such fetishes, but then we also have a lot of thefts. And what happens when these priceless murtis are stolen? This is an example of probably not just gods, historic data gets lost. This is possibly the only surviving portrayed bronze of Kulothunga Chola, the great Chola ruler of the 12th century, from temple in Kalahasti, last seen in the 1930s, never to be seen again. Nobody knows what happened, and the same is the story with his consort. Both these bronzes have been missing for the last 90 years, not never to be seen again. But not only that, the thieves have been very smart. They've kind of started replacing right in the 1950s. We will show you some examples coming now of how they have replaced original motifs with fakes. Uh, our people are very gullible, but then once you show them, I think they understand. So the Rama set, obviously, that you're looking at the screen right now, the Rama and Sita are original Chola bronzes, but the Lakshmana is a later replacement. Once I tell you that, it's very, very evident, but just that we are so used to not looking at them that you tend to not realize. Similarly, in this set, it's easy. The Rama is original, the Sita is a modern replacement. So what happens to all these murtis? Of course, they've been sold, auctioned. So you get a lot of these bronzes. And what happens to these bronzes is once they change hands a couple of times, the entire history is lost. So this is one such Gauri from the Kanjivaram temple, and it was supposed to be with a dancer called Rajagopal, and then somehow it went off into Europe in the early 1960s. But then it came up for an auction, and now all the reference to Kanjivaram is gone. It's just Parvati, and she sold for $1 million. This is another beautiful Vishnu, again from the Pallava dynasty. No context, it just becomes a Pallava Vishnu of the 8th century. Uh, Another superlative Vijayanagara bronze, she goes for 3 million almost. Now, these kind of prices are big. So, whenever we go to museums, some of the basic questions we seem to be missing is, frankly, what happened to Vishnu Varaha's feet? Now, a lot of people don't realize the savagery that robbing these motifs does, and how the impact. So, when I say restoring India's pride, for example, we'll see about Subhash Kapoor in a while. This is the first exhibit in the Metropolitan Museum. It's a gift of Subhash Kapoor, and it's from Chandraketuga. Chandraketuga is it's a site where okay. Chandraketugar is a site which was actually excavated only as recently as 1968. We will see the reason for the 1968 date in a while. Uh, Almost every museum has terracottas and stoneware from Chandraketugar. Chandraketugar is in Orissa. It's one of all about 2,000-year-old objects. Every collector, every auction has this. So we will look at why I talk about Chandraketuga when we talk about the UN Statuette of 1970. This is again coming back to the Varaha. Uh, this is the very famous site of Devgarh, and you see the Varaha sometime in 2004, around 4 o'clock in the evening. The locals hear a noise. This is on a sacred hill in Devgarh. The robbers basically chopped off the Varaha at its leg, and you can actually see why they didn't want to lift the entire base pedestal to be too heavy. So this was the what was left behind was just the feet of the Varaha. Uh, Similarly, there are other vandalism that happens. So basically, what the robbers do, they cut the mutis into different parts, ship it out, and then they restore it back in America. So this is another such varaha that was deliberately cut into parts for shipment. Not only that, there is an active market for heads. So the robbers basically, this is the famous Sun Temple in Umri. You can actually see what the robbers have done. They've chopped off the head and put it up for sale. The same happens, but then, for example, this is in Thailand, where when you enter Bangkok airport, for example, you will see these prominent boards. But no, in India, we have not yet, come up with any such uh, works. So yes, so what do we have? This is just ironical that we have old trusted Nataraj lock guarding our famous priceless Nataraj statues that go for millions of dollars abroad. So first of all, what we need to do is we have to recognize that we have a problem. So can you guess the year of this headline? This was a headline that was very prominent in a newspaper in 1985. So it's not something that's recent, and we're talking about 1,000 ancient Hindu idols stolen. And why was it? And this is not me talking. So we're talking, okay, forget the media. This is the CAG report. So the CAG report of 2013, this is not the CAG report. This is one of the CAG reports of 2013. And you can actually see this is on ASI. And what is interesting is just see the highlighted part at the end. Between 1976 and 2001, the 1976 date is because India brought in the Antiquities Act in 1976. In 1976 to 2001, India brought back 19 antiquities. That was India's success. And from 2001 onwards till 2013, the year of this report, India brought back zero. Just imagine that 19 antiquities. Why the year 2000 to 2013 is important? In 1998, Peter Watson, a BBC journalist, did a show called 960 Minutes, wherein he exposed a major collusion in a reputed auction house, Sotheby's in London. And this was a major sting on how Sotheby's was basically stealing Italian antiquities, moving it to Switzerland, and bringing them out as property of a Swiss gentleman and selling it in London. But then what is interesting is he also stumbled across similar modus operandi for India. And he, in fact, he published this book called Sotheby's: The Inside Story. It's still available on Amazon. Please pick it up. It's very interesting read. Wherein he starts off by saying, the robber said, "Do you want the Taj Mahal? Let me know. I'll ship it out in parts." Because what is interesting is he named three networks, and he also showed how executives from South Beach used to come to India. They used to go with scholars. They used to go with uh, our smugglers on recce trips. They would pick and choose objects that would sell in London in the art market, and then the robbers would be tasked. So this was a targeted looting on an industrial scale, and the wheels of justice moved slow. In 2003, Vaman Gia was arrested, one of the key persons mentioned. And the modus operandi was so bad that the Varaha that you're seeing now on screen is almost a 5-ton sculpture, the anthropomorphic form. The robbers actually tied a chain around its leg, tied it to a truck, and pulled it, breaking the legs, and sold it to a art dealer in Zurich. It's still there. We are trying to get it back, but the Swiss laws are still very tough. Last year, along with the Antiquities Coalition, we put out this top 10 most wanted sculptures of the world. We got this Varaha included. Now, what is interesting is Peter Watson named two executives of Sotheby's who actually came to India, worked with a Bombay based smuggler and a Rajasthan based smuggler. The two executives were immediately sacked, but India did nothing to follow up. Vaman Gia was arrested. Newspaper reports say that he confessed apparently to selling over 10,000 works of Indian art via Sotheby's, and also about 4 or 6 registered Swiss front companies as well. Nothing happened. Vaman Gia's properties in Delhi, farmhouses were raided. They yielded about 832 sculptures, of which about 410 were certified as antiquities. They are still in the police station. Vaman Gia was acquitted in 2013 for want of evidence because not a single of the 10,000 that is alleged, not even a single one came back. The same period, a lot of sculptures came back. They were voluntarily returned, no questions were asked, and Vaman Gia was acquitted. And what is interesting is this sad plight, which I wanted to share with you, is this beautiful Natesa from Rajasthan, published as he was in the Costa. Robbers actually made a replica, stole the original. Experts like Dr. Dimri from identified that the fake was left. The original was shipped to UK. When Vaman Gia was arrested, the dealer in UK got scared. He gave it back to the Indian High Commission in 2005, and there it sat in the Indian High Commission till last year when we went and reopened the case. Finally, this Natesa was shipped to India, because if he had come that time, it should have been evidence to reopen the Vaman Gia case. But sadly, he didn't come in time. So there are many such cases. I'm just going to show you a few. This is the famous, whenever people talk about restitutions, this is the famous case that's talked about, the Pattur Nataraja. And what is interesting is the Pattur Nataraja was actually uh, caught in London. The dealer actually tried to sell it to a Canadian company. So I picked up this case because I thought it will be of interest to you guys. In fact, I need some volunteer help, which I'll talk about towards the end. So this Nataraja was actually caught in a big case. It's called the London Nataraja case. Please take a look at it. It's a very interesting case where the British courts ruled the superior claim of the deity's consort, in this case the Parvati, and returned the Nataraja to India. So what is interesting is we celebrated the return of the Nataraja. No follow-up was made on the Canadian company. The Canadian company's name was uh, Bumper Development Corporation. And in 2013, the Bumper Development Corporation gave a large donation of almost 130, including 80 sculptures, to the Glumbo Museum. They also tried to sell about 200 artifacts via auction houses because they don't have provenance. They couldn't do it openly. We still don't know how much of these 80 statues that the Glenbow Museum obtained have any paperwork. So far, the museum has not put up any provenance information. So if any of you can, if you're in Glenbow, if you can help us get these details, it would be great. We just need to know what sculptures are there, some photographs, and some paperwork. And what was interesting is the similar case happened in so about 5 years later. And this is a very interesting story. A farmer was digging his field. He in 1956 he found six bronzes: a Nataraja, a Samandar, a Somaskandar, a Ganesha, and two Umas. He promptly gave it to the collector. The collector gave it to the Sivapuram temple. The temple gave it to a Stapati in 1957 to clean. In 1957, the Stapati made fakes. He gave the fakes to the temple and he sold the originals. Now, what is interesting, he sold it to a distinctive art collector, and the collector basically sold it to Norton Simon, who at that time was one of the richest person in the world, for $1 million. He's famously said to have claimed, "Hell yes, I know it's smuggled, so what?" So what is interesting is India basically wanted to sue Norton Simon for this bronze because this was a published bronze. There were photographs and finally India agreed for an out-of-court settlement. For 10 years, this bronze in 1972 could be displayed in a public US museum, and then it came back. All good, everybody happy. India did not have to pay any compensation to Norton Simon. Everybody is happy. But what is interesting is there is no news of the other five bronzes. So we just look at what happened. In fact, WikiLeaks actually talks about this. In case if you're interested, you can look at this presentation later. So the dealer who bought it basically was also publishing this interesting book on the British king and queen who visited Chennai in 1960. And this book, last page in 1960, remember the fakes were already switched in 1957. He had the audacity to put the original Nataraja in the back of this book. And what was interesting was this person died in Bombay in 2020 with a large eulogy in the paper. So what happened to the balance five? It's another shocking story, the untold story. So along with the Nataraja, the only other photograph that we have of the original is the Somaskanda that was published in this book by P.R. Natarajan. So what is interesting is this bronze is still on display in the Norton Simon Museum. It has a provenance plate saying it is from Sivapuram. There is an open FIR in India for this, saying it's not traceable. And why can't India ask for this? Because when India signed the out of court settlement for the Nataraja, they wanted to just shut out the noise in the press. They had a second clause inserted which said Norton Simon can obtain any object of Indian art for a period of 1 year, a moratorium, no questions will be asked. And in this 1 year, Norton Simon basically annexed over 250 of his private collection and just brought it. So basically, he washed his collection in this 1 year moratorium period. And what is interesting is all the other bronzes. So these are the fakes that were shown. But even then, we knew there were fakes being made. We never checked. So there was no documentary checks done. So last year, we managed to find this fake Tirumangayalvar, one of the Shaivite saints, Vaishnavite saints, in a temple in South India. The bronze original was with the Oxford Museum in Ashmole. We have since lodged a claim for it, and the Oxford Museum acknowledged the claim. Ashmolean is going to return the bronze when the COVID situation is over. We have since found that there are a lot of fakes in our temples. About 22 of them are currently work in progress. So back to the 1985 story. I showed you the headline. This was the reason for the headline in 1985. So this is another such sob story of this beautiful Nataraja that was seized. Not very interestingly, a police party from Tamil Nadu went to London, and along with the Scotland Yard police, they basically raided a dealer in London. In his gallery, they found 240 Indian icons and seized them. In his house, they seized another 41, and he had sold this one Nataraja to the Kimball Museum in the US. Only the Nataraja came back to India. There is no record of this 240 plus 240 plus 41, 281 items seized in London in 1985. The case papers have gone missing, both in India and in London. So yes, we have a lot of problems. So we have a lot of such cases where we have been negligent in the past. So want of paucity of time, just moving out. Film stars, filmmakers have been involved. So this is the famous Narang brothers, whose again farmhouse was raided in the 1990s. So you can get a lot of such cases that we keep coming up. So I just quickly jump to the international laws. India and Italy actually championed the UN to come up with an international statute. So this was one of the papers presented in 1970, and you can actually see our law enforcement had pretty good record keeping. By state, they could give you statistics of heritage crimes and cultural property theft, and in fact, they talk about whether they've been taken from theft or is it a burglary type of antique material. But nowadays, such reports don't come up, at least not that I have seen. And what was interesting is, sorry, okay. What was interesting is once the UN convention came up in 1970. India was one of the initial adapters, uh, along with the 1995 UNDROID convention. But of course, we have not signed the UNDROID convention. We don't want to go much into it. So the basic thing is what the UN convention says is if you can prove that the object left the source country after 1970, then you don't have to go to court. You just need to give the proof. If the other country is a signatory, they have to return within 30 days or they have to dispute the claim. If they cannot, then the object is forfeit to the source nation. So post 1970, it's much easier to fight. Pre 1970, so this is not some great Lakshman Rekha where if it's before 1970, we can't touch it. We just need to go to the courts to fight. So now we go and look at our Antiquities Act. It's a much maligned act. There has been a lot of attempts to malign the Toothless Act because a lot of people don't want. So, one of the main aspects of this Antiquity Act is registration. What it says is anything over 100 years, if you own, you have to register it. And if you transfer it, you can sell it within India. It cannot be exported. And if you are going to sell it, you have to sell it through an authorized dealer who had to keep a record of the sale. Now, this is touted by the collecting lobby as draconian regulation. They want to do away with it. And in the new proposed amendment, they want to do away the gatekeeper. So right now, if you have an antiquity, you have to take it to ASI, and the ASI officer has to check. He has to conduct an inquiry and see how you got it. You're going on the road, you see a sculpture, you put in the back of your car, then you claim it as yours. Cannot be done. You have to prove that it was in your family, how you obtained it. But in the new proposed regulation, this is going to be amended and it's going to be a free for all. In fact, we are fighting this, so you can read up later. We can also talk about role of experts. So this is one such expert. He was a French scholar called Dubriol. Now, what is interesting is Dubriol did a lot of studies on Pallava art, and here you see he basically chanced on a very, very important Shakta site. You can actually see these are yoginis in Kanchipuram. These are huge sculptures. He actually pillaged it because he was actually working as a sourcing agent for a Chinese art dealer based out of Paris called CT Lu. And these dispersed yoginis, I can actually see if you're reading about it, you can look at Madam Padma Kaimal's book. You can actually see he actually pillaged not just all these sold via CT Lu to major museums. All of them were taken out of India via the French colony of Pondicherry in between 1927 and 1938. And not only that, almost about we've tracked about 78 bronzes and about 100 stone sculptures that C.T. Lu sourced via Dubriol. So that's in the 1920s. Coming now, we are talking about this scholar called Douglas Latchwood. He's a British national with a dual passport, Thai passport. Here, you can actually see him in his house in Bangkok, sitting with a Chola Somaskanda. He passed away recently, and we also have a lot of Sava scholars who are writing catalogs, certifying objects. A lot of our objects are uh, so-called scholars are working hand in glove with art dealers and museums for I don't know whatever reason colluding. Here you see a solar seal, and this case that I wanted to show you was this brilliant Brahma with consort that was stolen from an archaeological site in Rani Ki Vav, Gujarat. We tracked it. Dr. Kirit Mankodi actually put it up on his site as missing, and we tracked it to a dealer in London. And what is interesting is we matched the object, and the ASI sent an expert, and the expert actually said it's not the same sculpture. So he said both of them are not the same, and he returned the sculpture back to the seller, dealer to sell. We actually went back and asked for what was the basis saying it's not the same. And what was interesting is this joke of a expert report. He says in the first, so here is the copy. He says in the first image, there are incrustation. That means the first image taken by ASA after excavation, there is mud and incrustations. In the sculpture he saw in London, it was clean. The second one, he says Brahma is serene, in the sense that I'm seeing the face of Brahma is serene. Here, it's not. Last one, the fourth point is very important. He says the finger of Brahma in the original sculpture, in the ASI photograph, is intact, whereas the one that I'm seeing in London is broken. It's the stupidest reason possible, because obviously when it was transported and trafficked, it broke. If the conveys were, then I would accept it. Meaning, if it was broken in the ASI photograph and if it was original was intact, then it was true. So we managed to lodge a complaints with the proofs. We gave them the and then what happened? We gave them all the details, and then an expert committee was appointed. We fought it, and basically this was returned. So if you are ever going to Delhi, you can take a look at this sculptures now currently back in India in the Purana Kila Stolen Artifacts Museum. So not only that, we are talking about a lot of our sacred objects. So this is a temple chariot that was on sale in Bombay. We did a sting with a paper. So it was on sale for 96 lakh rupees. And they got an expert to give it a 90-year-old certificate, saying it's just 90 years. Wood cannot be dated. So basically to avoid the ASI 100-year rule. Similarly, a lot of our temple jewelry is coming up for sale. Next is the role of intermediaries. So we're now talking, I showed you how a temple bronze is different from a buried hoard. So people want, the art world wants to buy buried hoards because they know it cannot be dug. So it's not photographed, it's not documented. So they know once it is smuggled out of the country, it's impossible to launch a restitution claim. So the art world is smart. So Subhash Kapoor basically used a restorer in London to paint it with chemicals to give it this greenish patina. So what you are seeing on the left is a robber photo. Robber photo meaning, nowadays because of social media, unlike the Vamangia case where the auction house executives had to come to India to see the object, now they're sending like prospective groom photos on WhatsApp, and people are bidding on our gods. And here you can see that this was Nataraja was bought by the National Gallery of Australia for $5.1 million. So, so here we're seeing a lot of such cases wherein the restorers are now. No, this is a classic example. You know, when one look at it, you know it is fresh off the ground. And here you can see the restorer basically making it, making her a new leg and polishing it up to make look. So this is against every concept of can this be sourced. So why is this that we have a problem? So I just wanted to show you. Uh, can I take another 10 minutes? Is it okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, sure. So what is the problem? So I just wanted to show you, we have so much undocumented sculptures. So for example, here you see, just there, you have a 9th century Jain Tirthankara seated there, right there. So Buddha is on the field, just inside a colony. So a lot of such sculptures are there. When they're lost, the mutts or the custodians are not coming up and reporting the theft. No, this is from Mount Abu. You can actually see, obviously, the original has been stolen. The new one has been made and crudely inserted, but nobody is lodging a complaint. And because of that, robbers. So this is actually one of the objects that we have tracked to a dealer, and you actually see a lot of such thing coming up, and it becomes very difficult even with clear proof to work these cases. So I'm just going to show you how difficult it is to lodge a stolen claim. And this is actually a Shalabanjika ceiling damsel that is currently on the display in the Denver Museum. It's a photograph documented antiquity by ASI, and you can actually see the kind of work that's gone in. We have matched the object. You can actually see every scratch has been matched. Despite all this, for the last 20 years, the Denver Museum is asking questions like prove that it is how it was moved. What people don't realize is when public museums hold on to stolen artifacts, they're actually allowing the theft to happen. And this is in from Karnataka. This is a temple in Kikeri that was hit about 8 years ago. Robbers actually hit this temple, and you can actually see uh, the grill that's been put after the theft. What happened was this is you can actually see how the robbers basically broke open and took away six of these beautiful sculptures are missing. We're still searching for them. They've not yet come up in the art market. So, so this is what I do as part of our team. Uh, we work on restitution. We build awareness. We also work in terms of being a deterrent. For me, uh, Uh, yes, we influence policy. We also work on capacity building. So how do we work each of these? We work in trying to build awareness with school children and talks like this. You can actually see this was all that we do in terms of awareness. We work with volunteers. We don't take any funding. We don't take any financial contributions. If you really want to contribute, if you see an object that is coming for sale, if you see a publication that is of interest, we ask you to scan it and send it to us. Later, we can discuss how we can do it. So we work on this. We also work as soon as objects are found. We are trying to encourage people to report it so that once it's documented, it becomes impossible to sell in the international market. People are also reporting thefts. People are sending us catalogs. So you can see we're building this knowledge base, knowledge archive, and we work basically going back to the data mining the archive. So this is an interesting case of a book that was published in the previous century. So you can actually see the date of the publication is 1914, and this was the only photograph available of this bronze that we managed to track to a museum. We are now working to bring it back. And this is another case of why documentation important. So this was a Jain Murti that was stolen from a temple in Bihar. The Mutt reached out to us and we told them if it's documented, please publish it. So they published the photograph in every newspaper. The timing is very important. Within before the artifact is smuggled out of the borders or even taken out of the state, if they know it is worthless, if it's documented, this is what the robbers did. They just threw it off in the nearby forest. So it's very, very important for custodians, first of all, to document it, file an FIR, and say that it is documented. Once it's documented, the object becomes uh, unsellable. And one such success story, you can see this is a stupa in Chandavaram. There is a clue in this photograph which helped a German researcher friend to help us bring back an artifact. I'll share that. So this is my book. I'm not trying to pitch my book, but this is the story of how we caught probably India's largest idol smuggler of the last 2 decades. That's him. Sadly, the two bronzes behind him combined value of $13.5 million, along with one more Nataraja, one more. His sisters hidden them in New York in 2013, and we still not able to find the four of them. We call him a Janus figure because he can see the past. He basically worked with thieves in India, basically buying artifacts. So I'll just show you some of the restitutions. What was interesting is his father in 1970 was actually charged with the theft of a Vishnu bronze, but he came up for hearing only in 1993, by which time they had all emigrated to the US. So it looks like it was a family business for him. And what kind of business was it? This was it. So you actually what you're seeing here is an Nataraja from the Parur temple. The robbers basically thought it was made of gold, not realizing the Chola bronzes literally have very, very minuscule compositions of gold and silver. They actually sawed off his hand, melted to check if it had gold. So what is interesting is the jeweler who melted it said there's no gold. In an argument, the robbers hit him and he died. So it was a murder case in 2005 for this Nataraja. But what interesting is 2 years later, this Nataraja appeared on the cover of Subhash Kapoor's sale catalog in New York. So how did this Nataraja go from Coimbatore to New York? More surprisingly, it had the hand back. Now we know that the restorer in London basically against all. So you really know somebody has used an axa blade to cut off the hand, but still the restorer did not inform the police. He made a new hand. What is more interesting is a month before Kapoor was arrested via an Interpol notice, Red Corner notice in Germany in October of 2017, 2012, 2011, sorry. This bronze made a miraculous journey back to Chennai and it was handed over quietly to the police. So a hand-cut Nataraja left India, went to London, got a hand back, went to New York, appeared for sale, and then a month before he was arrested, comes back to Chennai, all without any passport or visas. It's interesting. Plus, a lot of his accomplices were arrested. One was this Dina Dayal. His house in a very posh locality in Chennai yielded over 300 sculptures, a lot of sculptures from South India. None of the temples or Karnataka or Kerala came up to claim these objects, despite them clearly being from there. So we also worked with law enforcement. We found a lot of these robber photos, and we use these robber photos to track them. So you can actually see this is the Nataraja. This is a two door guardians that have now been returned by the Australian government in February of last year. Because of COVID, it's not public. But behind the door guardians, you can actually see two vesties or dhotis, and on the right you see a lungi. So these are basically held by the robbers, and these are images that are being sent to prospective buyers to show. So this I'm just going to show you a few how we work with success stories. This was one of our earliest success stories, the Vidrascharam Ardhanari. It was a celebrated Chola Androgynos form, and what you're seeing in red background is the robber photo. She was taken out in 2004. I had studied the object because it was so beautiful that somebody has to tell you that two of his hands or her hands are broken for you to realize that the left hand is broken and the right lower hand is broken. But what is interesting is the robbers basically made a replica, and what you're seeing here is the fake that was kept in the temple. So it was bought by the Art Gallery of South Australia for almost $500,000. We managed to, once we saw that it was it, I managed to make the connection. We reported to the media, and there you see the Ardhanarishwara being returned in 2013 to Prime Minister, 2014 to Prime Minister Modi by the Australian Premier. And instantly, what happened was till this time, Australia was stonewalling all our efforts when we asked them for any documents. And once this happened, they were forced to give us a lot of the details. And as we went and checked the paperwork, it was ridiculous. Almost every object had the same fake paperwork. And it was like a pattern, no? 23 objects, all of them seem to have the same fake ownership records. And based on that, we managed to get back this Pratyankara from the same temple. We also worked with them to get back a lot of these sculptures. So each of them is a story by itself. But what is interesting is Australia chose to return only those objects that we could prove that it was stolen after 1970. A case in point is this bronze of Jana Sambandha. It's published as missing in a book that was launched by Prime Minister Modi along with the then French Premier Frank Mitterrand. And why is Australia not? So this was taken from the Sirgadi temple, and we have a photograph documented by the French Institute in Pondicherry of this artifact in the temple, but it was stolen in 1968. And because it is prior to the UN convention, Australia is still refusing to give back this object. Well, again, this was the Chandavaram. So Chandavaram is another sad tale. In 2003, 4, 5, in three times robbers came and robbed the ASI site museum in Chandavaram. First time they came, they hit the guards. The second time, they tied up the police. The third time, they drugged the police. And this uh, Buddhan relief was broken, shipped to Australia. With this fake provenance, we managed to get it back. And this is where I talked about the proof. There you see in the bottom when it was still unexcavated. We had a German scholar who helped us. What is interesting is later, only after this object came back, that we knew it was from Chandavaram. We went and checked. There was so many missing from Chandavaram. We have now tracked another object that was sold by another dealer who's now charged in the US, auctioned off. The lure in Abu Dhabi is holding on to another object from the same site sold by Subhash Kapoor. This is the matched pair. Um, And this is again a story that you need to see the book. This is our work. We look at documentation, early 1960s and 70s. We have to go through these bin cards one by one. You're talking about 300 to 400 such cards a day. Once you have a match, you can go and look back. And this is how we matched. So this is the Nataraja that came back, one of our very, very satisfying successes. Nataraja was documented in the 1970s. The custodian praying to an empty shrine after it was robbed. The robber photo sold for $5.1 million to the Australian gallery. And what is interesting is the curator was a loudmouth. He said, "Look, all Nataraja are the same. You guys don't know one from another." So instead of replying to him, so if you guys are on YouTube, please go look at my channel Poetry in Stone. Look for Return of the Dancer. We gave him the evidence. We matched about 32 breakages and small, uh, chinks that and put it up as proof. And it was so compelling that Australia had to return, and he went back. He was placed in the same place from where he was stolen, and this is how the temple was restored to receive the god. So it was in a ruined state when it was robbed. The villagers basically restored the temple to receive the Lord. The Nataraja currently is still in evidence in court. He's going back to temple for main ceremonies, but we're working to get it back. So not only that, we are trying to work another case. This is a Nagapatnam Buddha. And what is interesting is this Buddha was loaned by it was obviously stolen from a temple. It was sent on loan to the Asian Civilization Museum. It was opened by the then Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh as part of Nalanda Way. And because of that, when it went back to the dealer, he increased the price to 1.5 million, saying exhibited in the Nalanda Way. So we have to be really careful when we work such. So we have a lot of such cases. This is the Uma, a pair of Sri Purana that came back from Singapore. This is the Toledo Ganesha, which we tracked, was very small blemish. So this is where documentation is so important. This small blemish in the trunk helped us get back the Ganesha. And when Prime Minister Modi went to the US, this was gifted to him. You can actually see him getting back this bronze. So a lot of such are in context. I see a chat window asking about the Mahakuda Devata. I'll just show you. I'll just show you this one more. So before I end, this is a case where we tracked a stolen skanda, which Kapoor tried to sell as a. So it was a Pallava skanda. He's trying to sell it as a Pandya Shiva. So we work with law enforcement. Work in progress is happening. A lot of such objects are on the way back. How big was the loot? Just this one dealer's loot, and what you're going to see is just what is seized by the US as part of Operation Hidden Idol. Between 2012 and 13, what you're seeing is the objects that have been seized in the US. And here you're seeing a Indo-Gangetic anthropomorphic form and even an Indus seal. We're not talking one or two. So how many? 14 known storage locations were raided in New York alone, just in New York. They yielded over 2,622 objects. That was his holding stock, valued at $108 million. So this was his unsold holding stock. And he was in one dealer, he was in business for 35 years. So we've also worked a lot working with law enforcement. You could have seen the Asia Week reads. This is some of our works where we work with robber photos, objects that are coming back. So this is the Mahakuta. So this was the Yakshi that was private or was using it as a Kuladevata. It was registered antiquity. Kapoor had it smuggled out by breaking it into three pieces, as you can see. It was stitched by a US restorer, put in back, and it was in sale for $15 million. Lucky it's seized and ready to come home once the COVID situation comes. You can also look at later, I can show you this video of how we tracked a case from 1960s. This was a theft of a Nalanda Buddha from the Nalanda Site Museum. So we got it in 2017, restituted from a dealer in London, eventually coming back home. A lot of such cases are currently a work in progress. So you will definitely see more coming up. This is again a Nataraja that came back. There's a lot of work need to be done. What you have to understand is temple theft is currently under Section 380 of the IPC. which has a maximum punishment of 6 to 7 years. In my home state of Tamil Nadu, in 1993, they brought in an amendment. Section 380 is housebreaking theft. So in Tamil Nadu, if somebody robs a temple by this special amendment, it's only 3 years. Compared to if somebody robs a house, is having 6 to 7 years. So actually, robbing a temple is half the sentence. So that's how pathetic the situation is. So please help us. I'd be happy to take questions. Help us bring our gods home. Thank you.
Okay, Vijay, that was great. As I said in the beginning of the seminar, that this is a topic which we all know, but like we are aware of it, but we do not know the depth and the extent of the loot that has been going on, for the 200 years, and even after independence, when we are supposed to safeguard our own heritage and our own treasures. So we will start with the questions. Now we have a lot of questions posted on the chat box. I'll start with some of them, and then we will alternate between questions posted in the chat box and anyone who raises their hands. So first, there's a question from Ashish Mahavalji. He says, like, do most returned artifacts go to museums with history displayed? What fraction do they go back to the temples, and or what is there any possibility of these items being remaining with the police or middlemen like politicians?
Okay. We have been campaigning objects to go back if there is a definitive proof that it was stolen from a particular temple. So the objective is, as much as possible, for them first to go to where they were stolen from, if not at least to the state. But unfortunately, because the states are not coming to claim, they are currently being housed in the Puranakila Museum. But I just want to show you one video because I feel it's important. If you are okay, can I just play one video so that people can understand? Can you allow me to share just a short clip? Is that
Uh,
okay?
yeah, like this couple of minutes, I think it should be fine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's just a short one. So I just wanted to show people because a lot of people ask us what happens when objects come back. So I'm just going to show this. Apologies for the quality. I just want to show you this. So what you're seeing is actually entire village turning up to receive a god, and he's coming back. So this was the Nataraja that was restituted from the art gallery of South Australia 2 years ago, and you can actually see the ceremonious welcome as he enters the temple. So I think this is what we would love to happen to every artifact that we come back. So I just want to show that. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
Thank you. Samir ji, please go ahead and ask questions. Thank you.
What do you do to discourage buyers, especially the millionaires and the billionaires? Do you do like shaming or legal action?
Thank you. That's a good question. I think first we're now targeting policy. So, for example, Australia has a temporary ban on any public museum buying any Indian art for the last 2 years. So, I think that's the biggest thing. It's akin to ivory. So, when the buying stops, the killing stops. So, we are working, for example, in policy building. We want India to sign what is called a cultural policy MOU with the US, which is offered by the US free of charge. It's no strings attached, which Italy, Cambodia, Greece, Egypt have signed, which allows the US to basically stop and inspect any suspected Indian object, even if it's not coming out of Indian ports, because as I told you, much of the objects are shipped through transit points, which unfortunately India has not yet signed the MOU. So for us, the biggest deterrent is proving. So as you can see, we've got a lot of success in the UK and the US, Australia, Singapore. So we believe once, in the past, India was very slack, as you can see. So Indian art was fair game. But I think in the last, since we got actively working in this domain. We've been doing this since 2006, but as you can see, a lot of support from the US and Europe came since 2010, where law enforcement started taking us seriously because they thought we were good people who are doing it with pure intentions. I think we have now recovered or restituted back to India about 63 objects. So in hindsight, you can remember it was 19. So it's 19 plus 63. Another 72 are the US promised to return 200 when Prime Minister Modi went there in June of 2016, of which about 13 have come back. The senior team from ASI went to inspect this 2,622 objects. They managed to inspect 72. I think about 90 will come to India shortly, and another 110 of this promised 200 should hit our show soon. So I believe these restitutions are powerful deterrents to the collecting lobby. We are also working with customs. For example, Europol and Interpol are doing periodic exercises. You could read up on our Twitter handle. You'll see these exercises in Europe where they are coordinated seizures across the EU, wherein they're going after illicit antiquities. I think the combination of stopping the pipeline and discouraging people with the fear that they're going to lose millions that they've poured into unprovenance antiquities. But we could do more, yes.
Okay, thank you. There's one more question posted here. The knowledge database that you mentioned, is that public, and can you post the link? So,
One is you have to understand there is a slight difference between publishing missing objects. The time frame is very critical. If you do it later, the art market they will destroy the object if they know it's documented. So if you have so our database, I'm for one is not for publicizing lost databases. Interpol does have a platform where you can report thefts, but we normally do it after we know where it is. So if it's, for example, in a prominent museum where we know they will not hide it or destroy it, then we will publicize it. But otherwise, we wait for it to surface. So it does, as I explained to you, because of the fencing aspect, objects take years and years to come up. So if you hurry it and put objects for missing, there is a chance that we hardly have 1 in 100 that we can find documentation. The robbers basically look at us cost of doing business. So yeah, it is a very very close loop, and we hope to keep it that way. But again, if any of you are keen to become our volunteers, my normal advice is, most of them when they see this presentation feel really bad. Immediately they want to help. I would ask them to take a week off. If you really remember me after a week, write to me. So give a week, let it sink in. If you still remember me out of your day-to-day work, please reach out to me.
okay, that makes sense, Vijayji. So we have a question from Hari Raghavanji. Please go ahead. Hari Raghavan. Okay, okay, we'll come back to him later. So
Wait,
there's
hi.
sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is your website? I just want to see, and then I'll definitely come back to you after a week. I'm very interested.
Sure.
But
So
just share your website and some details if you can.
Sure, I will put it to the organizers. So right now, I will. They have their my mail contacts. The work that we do, because we are taking on a very very powerful collecting lobby. So for some cases, we obviously cannot be too open in the work that we do, because as I told you, we are talking millions of dollars. We are after all of us have day jobs, and we do this in our spare time. So we'd be happy for support. So please reach out to me, and we can take it offline and we discuss our work.
Vijayji,
Just look at Twitter, look for hashtag Bring Our Gods Home, and my handle is Poetry in Stone, Vijay at Poetry in Stone. You will see my work.
okay, great. Or you could also, if you get a chance, post it on the chat website, chat box, or the people can
Sure.
take it from there. Okay, thanks. We have a question here from Jay Ramanji. Is it true that there are some big industrialists from Tamil Nadu who are involved in this antiquities trade? Do you know something about that?
For me, I think that's the job of law enforcement. For us, we work on matching. So our expertise is basically working with. So we want to become crowdsourced idle hunt. So basically, if somebody is missing something, uh, in the past, we've had cases where somebody will say, my grandfather's time, he told me that something was missing from a temple. No, is there a chance? We have worked out similar cases. So I would rather, instead of going into politics and getting into name calling, for me, the job of prosecution is with law enforcement. I think we have quite capable team right now. I would rather focus on uh, strengthening our current laws, uh, putting our brains to make punishments more severe, and making it more difficult for people to escape the law. That's on the awareness front. But our expertise is more to leveraging our knowledge base. So we are monitoring online auctions. We have volunteers who are going out on art fairs. So whenever there's an Indian object for sale, if you come across anything, like most of you are outside of India, if you see in Paris or you're going to Amsterdam, you see an Indian object for sale, don't risk yourself. If the shopkeeper allows you to take a photograph and you can send it to us. We will keep your information confidential, but please don't put yourself at any personal risk.
Sorry, okay. We have a question from Sangeeta ji. I mean, it is a question which obviously comes to everybody's mind, that once this, knowledge of this artifacts being stolen has become knowledge publicly available, then why can't the government of India sue the auction houses or the people who hold them abroad? Why isn't that being done?
I would say that India has been very soft. In fact, I didn't dwell on it. In the case of the Toledo Ganesha, when we identified that it was stolen, the bronze was stolen, they basically wrote the museum. After we wrote to them, they didn't reply to us. They wrote to the Indian High Commission, and for 8 months they did not get a reply. Then they wrote to the Indian High Commissioner. In fact, I have copies of the letters, and for 1 year they did not get a response. So in 2014, the museum gave the Ganesha to Homeland Security, and Homeland Security in turn returned it to Prime Minister Modi when he was there in June. So in the past, as I said, we have been very, very slack, and we have been avoiding litigation compared to other countries like Italy. So I keep talking about Italy because I said when we first launched the campaign, Italy and India were the key players. Italy actually started what is called a national art squad called the Carabinieri Art Squad. They have recovered since 1970 close to a lakh and 10,000 objects for Italy compared to our 19. The Carabinieri Art Squad has the best of the art force. They have best lawyers, best legal team. They have their own database. They have image crawlers, image matching, latest technology, which they actually share with other law enforcement. They conduct seminars. They publicize returns. But they go and sue auction houses. They have a setup in the US, for example, they stop auctions when they suspect an object. Unfortunately, India is still very, very soft. We rely on soft diplomacy, and it takes years. For example, the Denver has been going on for almost 23 years, despite clear proof. Uh, yes, things could get much better if we are more aggressive.
Okay, thank you. So another question that naturally comes up is since there is enough evidence or knowledge that a lot of these artifacts they do not belong to, say, the Western nations, for example, then why do these reputed museums and art galleries buy the antique pieces, probably knowing that they may have been stolen? And even if they're not stolen, then they have been taken out without the consent of the local population.
Sure. That's a good question in the sense that I've not dwelt on it in big, but till about 10 years ago, most Western countries had a gifting program. That means if you're a wealthy collector, if you gift an art object at its current value, you get tax breaks. So this was a scam that was used by wealthy collectors in Australia and the US, wherein they would buy an object, for example, an auction, keep it up for about 5 6 years. They would have bought it for say £8,000. Then they get a favorable valuer to value it for £100,000. Then they gift it to a museum. The museum obviously thinks it's getting it free, so they would accept it graciously. And then the rich owner can claim tax breaks, which he can uh, keep in abeyance for about 4 to 5 years. So basically, he can use the tax breaks for 4 to 5 years. So this is a scheme that is exploited by many rich collectors. Number two is a fetish. As I said, these bronzes were, say, when I say bronzes, I keep saying bronzes because they're so beautiful. They were created to capture the eyes of, say, 1,000 people when they're coming out in processions. Remove the 1,000 pairs of eyes with just a pair of the collector. So I think that is one of the problem with our sculptors. They made them so beautiful that the charm basically in capture. It's like it's a disease of collectors. But I would say museums are scared that once they start returning, they'll become empty. So that is the biggest problem. So most museums definitely know they're dealing with unprovenance antiquities, but they do know that governments are not, like India, not very keen to pursue. So they want to prolong, delay it. So they feel, 2 3 years, if they delay responses, maybe India will forget.
Okay, makes sense. Well, we have a question from Bal Prashantji. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Hello, Vijay. So the question which I have is, so basically, I'm given to understand that ASI as an organization, it has a team of field archaeologists who document the antiques in various heritage sites all across India. So once that is done, what exactly are the steps which are taken to protect or conserve them? I mean, any pitfalls do you find in that? Any bureaucratic, hindrances in getting funding and so on, which in turn translates to lack of protection of these newly excavated heritage sites and so on. So I mean, is there anything that you can tell with respect to this about how because of lack of protection of certain recently discovered heritage sites, has the theft of antiques in from those places, have they been directly I mean, have they increased in direct correspondence to the lack of protection over there? And what exactly does ASI do in general? And is the what should I say, the laxidal approach of ASI, is it contributing to the problem? What exactly are the issues over there? Can you please elaborate on that?
Sure. I would say it's a big question. I would suggest you look at the CAG report that I've shown. It's available on the CAG's website. Read it. You will know how pathetic it is. Uh, 98 heritage sites are missing. I'm not talking about objects. Heritage sites have gone missing. They can't find it. And this is in 2013. I think they managed to find another 10, still over 83, and this is a random sample. There are museums where they've not, like for example, the Indian Museum in Calcutta, the Astor Museum in Calcutta, the Chennai Museum. They have multiple robberies. For example, in the Chennai Museum, there have been 7 break-in, no, successful break-ins, but officially the only thing that was stolen was one fake replica coin. So no audits have been done, no attempts have been made to even tally the stock. And as per the CAG report, for example, on one museum, the official stock that should have been was running to about 4,800 objects. They could see only about 2,000 there. But nothing has been done. So for me, the biggest problem is blaming one organization. So in fact, I've been writing a series of articles on the Express as editorials. It's again on my Twitter handle, where I've actually explained what the problems of the Antiquities Act, because it doesn't have a penalizing provision. So the Antiquities Act has no penal provision. And the biggest problem is we have to go either to Customs Act, wherein that means physically the object has to be exported out, or we have to go to IPC, wherein you have to prove the theft. So many cases people get away with objects, like for example, they find somebody with an artifact in a car. The guy basically says, I forgot to register, and he gets away with it by hiring lawyers. So there are a lot of loopholes. But I would say my biggest problem with the custodians, I don't want to name any department, the basic anger is not there. Imagine you're walking on the road, somebody picks your pocket. What would you do? You run after him, make sure you get your purse back to whatever it is. And here, somebody is robbing our gods, robbing our country's centuries old, in fact, millennia old cultural treasures, openly auctioned, and nobody seems to care a damn. And that to me is the biggest problem that we have to address.
Okay, thank you, Vijay. So obviously the question is that we would like to involve the future generation in this activity and they will take it forward. So the question that we have is, how do we create awareness among college students and make them a part of this project?
I would even go one step lower to school students. In fact, if you are okay, I do a similar session based on introduction to iconography based on Amashita Kada stories. So just to get them introduced to the amazing world of temple art. I think our syllabus does gross injustice to teaching our children about the amazing art of our ancestors. I think the first thing that we need to do is to popularize. No, nowadays people don't even visit. So what I ask is, whenever you go back to India, go back to your ancestral village, at least visit the temples. Once there are footfalls, the temples, I don't want you to promise any financial support. Just visit the temples. Most of the sites that we do with our volunteers, there are bad droppings and animal excreta. They have not been cleaned for years. I think we need to basically the take care, or our sacred duty is that all we need to do is to protect and pass on to the next generation, and we are failing to do that.
Okay, thank you. It's almost time, it's almost 12:25, so we can have a couple of questions more. There is a very interesting question posted. Is there something equivalent of the International Court of Justice, like an International Cultural Court or a UNESCO Court for reclamation of indigenous heritage, something like that?
Well, there was a famous trail. You can read about it, but it's very, very difficult because two things. One, for example, whenever we talk about the art which is stolen, the precedence is given to Holocaust art. So it hits Europe in its heart. So any of the Nazi loot always get prevalent. So the Holocaust art is a big thing, and restitution museums spend a lot of money to basically check provenance. But then for sacred objects, they don't seem to care that much. So I would say the UN tried its best. So something as simple as retrospective effect, they are not being able to push through because many of the countries that hang on to a lot of unpronounced antiquities, and many of the collectors, of course, these guys are multi-billionaires, and obviously they have a lot of influencing capacity. In fact, in a regulation that the US brought about, where they're bringing in banking secrecy to art market because they know that it is being used for laundering. So as recently as last year, the US has come in with art dealers having to do due diligence, report suspicious transactions. We know that the auction houses actually spent money. I think in the New York Times report, they said they spent officially about $100,000 to influence public policy to make sure that this inclusion would not happen. So basically, not to have bank secrecy regulations impacting dealership. So that is what we are up against. So I don't think they would ever allow. So the UN cannot force anybody to sign. So even the 1970 statute is not signed by many prominent intermediary countries. So if you make it very strict or retrospective, they say we don't sign it. So it is. So I think India has to take a very aggressive stand. I see an interesting question. I did show you Jain sculpture. I just show you a Buddhist sculpture. So I'm not here just to recover Hindu murtis. In fact, we are working to get back an ivory crucifix and an altar from Goa. So I would say that we have even looked at Indus objects which are predating, even proper worship. So I don't want to be looked at with a colored lens. Anything and everything is part of our great land. Thank you.
Okay. So we have one last question. It's about the Kohinoor diamond. And
Simple. I think it belongs to a temple, but to me, it's just a piece of rock. It's symbolic. I would rather have my efforts going after living gods and precious objects of worship that have, that reinstate faith back in villages. You should actually go and see. So I was in this village down south where we got this Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita back to worship. You can actually see the old priest who under whose watch it was actually stolen, literally in tears. He said, I looked after these bronzes as my son and daughter. So I think that is more important for us. Diamonds, of course, it is colonial loot, has to come back. But my focus is more to stop the continuing looting of our temples. When I say temples, again, generic term, our cultural heritage sites.
right, makes sense. So, okay, it's almost 12:30. It's time now. And so we will conclude our session here. Vijayji, thank you once again very much for taking the time to present here and showing your work and the very important missing cultural heritage that we are missing because of the obvious loop that has been going on. And thank you to all the audience who has taken the time to attend, ask questions, and hopefully, as Vijay has suggested, that maybe after a week's time, if it still bothers you, then he is glad to communicate with you and take your help, any help that can be given to him. So thank you.
Can we end on a good note? Can you allow
Sure.
me to play a 1 minute video? Just want to know, we heard a lot of bad things. I want to end with a good thing. Can I just show one video and then we close?
Okay, yeah, all right.
1 minute.
Of India's national cultural heritage, a 12th century AD bronze image of Bhagwan Buddha. This is an incredible story of a 900-year-old cultural heritage that was stolen 57 years ago and is being returned back to India today. This image was among the 14 bronze statues stolen from the Archaeological Survey of India Museum at Nalanda in August 1961. Earlier this year, the High Commission and the Met Police were alerted by Mr. Vijay Kumar of India Pride Project about surfacing of this bronze statue.
Collaboration between relationship.
Great. That's what I wanted to show, is to just end it on a happy note that may more of our gods come home. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijayji. Excellent work. Okay. Thank you, everyone.